So yeah, I'm really running behind this week, so let's just jump right into these two. Starting with the Lego Movie, obviously. The Lego Movie 2, the second part, being the full title. So, as far as these go, I'm just gonna flat out say that these appear to be wearing a bit thin on me. I don't know if it's... And I don't even necessarily think it's like the concept that's wearing thin, it's just the movies are getting not as good. Because while I did like the first Lego movie, I wasn't like totally crazy about it the way a lot of people were. But I did really love the Lego Batman movie quite a bit. But then the Ninjago thing came out, and that kind of just had a general reputation of not being at all up to par with these. But there was the chance of a bit of a bounce back after the Lego Ninjago movie with this movie, but at least to me anyway, that didn't really feel like it got here either. So it does start off really fast, like to the point that this movie starts jarringly fast, where it basically just, if I remember correctly, I haven't seen the first one in a while now, but it seems to basically just start right exactly where that one ended, or at least very, very close to it. Where they hint at the very beginning with Will Ferrell's voice, because Will Ferrell is like barely here at all. I was kind of surprised he was even credited. I almost wouldn't have been surprised if they just used like archive audio of his voice for what he does here. But regardless, and it's like I mean, it seemed like they were trying to do something intentional with the whole him being a distant dad thing. But I mean, he is here so incredibly little. It's almost like they were dancing around something. Like maybe he was doing Holmes and Watson at the same time or something, which was kind of, not that this is on that same level, but really lose-lose, I guess. So, and they built up the whole thing about his sister is going to be playing with the toys now also. And that's kind of the starting point immediately for what I think was the movie was kind of struggling with, was the fact that obviously it was this big giant twist, that this is actually like the real world and we're basically just seeing the Legos as they're being played with, and that's what the world we've been watching is. But the thing is that we know that now, and we're like in on it. So, and it does seem to acknowledge that enough, given how much it bounces back and forth between showing us what's obviously fake and then showing us as if it was the way we saw the world in the first movie, without us before we knew that. And that sort of immediately sort of takes away from the what the first one really had going for it, was because they were able to build that world enough, literally, to where it just really felt like this big sort of endless thing, and there was this constant energy to it, and anything seemed possible, any sort of world. You had no idea where exactly they were going to end up at the next point. And that's obviously not going to really be here if you not only know that because you saw the first movie, but the movie keeps reminding you that this isn't the actual world. It's just the world within the real world. And I'm not really sure what exactly they'd planned to accomplish by showing that so much. They try to get some humor out of it, like when we literally see things on strings practically, um, which I don't remember them going into in the first one, or really that much, because like things flew in the first one, but we just kind of saw it as is, as they saw it, the characters within. But now they seem to want to have fun with us knowing that, and it's really, the whole world itself kind of takes a huge hit from that, because we're just kind of constantly acknowledging that. Um, but anyway, as far as like this whole opening scene goes, then you have. I'm starting to notice with a lot of the stuff recent movies have been going into, sort of like how I talked about Teen Titans Go to the Movies had like so much low hanging fruit jokes and jokes that feel like they're being clever and meta when they're just jokes that have been made over and over and over again, and the last thing they are is fresh. This kind of suffers from that also. Mainly, we're now going on 4 years since Fury Road came out. But apparently referencing it is still really fresh and new, because we've got this whole giant opening that's basically like the Mad Max setting, To the point that I'm pretty sure I even saw somebody in an Immortan Joe mask, and then the Elizabeth Banks character even does like a replication of the voiceover scene at the beginning of that movie. And also in regards to like dystopian settings, I also every now and then there was a set that was a reminder of like the Vegas setting in Blade Runner 2049. But it's yeah, and then they go through this whole after they've established that world, they go through this whole Fury Road esque action scene, complete with the cars and like similar, just the way the whole thing was orchestrated, and it's like this felt like it went on for a really really long time. Like they really really committed to this Mad Max opening. And it probably wasn't as long as it felt, but that's it. It felt very long and very drawn out, and it's like, yeah, you're making a Mad Max joke, and then like 20 minutes later, hey, you're still making the Mad Max joke. That's refreshing. But then going on to the other jokes that they do eventually finally get to, another thing that also kind of shows that the movie seems to almost be buckling to a certain extent, and it's an article that I saw, or not a headline that I saw. I didn't bother to read it, but basically saying that they were gonna have this movie acknowledge what Everything Is Awesome meant in the first movie, because they were afraid that a lot of audiences didn't quite get it, despite the fact that once again, I haven't seen it for a little while, but I'm pretty sure they spelled it out pretty clearly in the first movie, but apparently they just really, really, really wanted to get across to people that Everything Is Awesome is actually an ironic song in context. So they spend a lot of the movie driving that home, and having similar songs in it also. And that's... Yeah, and they try to do the song thing even more in this one, because on top of that, basically having songs that blatantly dissect the meanings of the movie, we also have one number from our villain, who is Tiffany Haddish, who is a somewhat interesting concept. It's kind of hard to describe, where she's basically these blocks and bricks that are like ever changing. So there is something interesting to that, but number one, she's voiced by Tiffany Haddish. So, but secondly, also, this song, when she's like basically at first it felt like an interesting sort of jab at the fact that a lot of animated movies lately have the twist villain, so that basically the song seems to be a joke on the fact that she's gonna be a twist villain, but she's basically blatantly saying she's a villain while trying to not so hide it. But then the more this song goes on and the more they stretch this joke out, the more obvious the real punchline becomes. So that basically spells itself out. Even if... And it's to the point now to where they're doing the meta thing so much, or trying to do the meta thing so much, I can't even tell if, like... Because every time something happens in this movie, it's, like, extremely predictable. But then you have the question back in your head, in the back of your head, saying, like, is that what they wanted? Is the joke that it's predictable? But I didn't do a whole lot of laughing, so I don't know if I can say that if that's the case, that it works. But I don't know. It really just feels sloppy, quite honestly, and I don't even think that... I feel like that's giving them a bit too much credit to somewhat assume maybe they're in on just how predictable the movie is, but I think it's really just that, and doesn't go any deeper than that. And then they also have stuff like stuff that seems to sort of contradict what they were doing. Because on one end, they really really want to go out of their way to spell out the meaning of Everything Is Awesome as much as they can. But then at the same time, they've got a song in particular that just kind of rubbed me the wrong way and just annoyed me more than anything else. The song that was intentionally made to get stuck in your head, because the lyrics are, this song is going to get stuck inside your head. That's something that just seems like them playing the audience like a fiddle, which is, once again, bizarrely sort of contradictory to the whole Everything Is Awesome thing. Because it's like, they do that, and they make that joke, and they write that song knowing audience members are going to come waltzing out of the theater saying, oh my god, they were right, that song is stuck in my head, and then they'll be annoyingly saying it to their friends or family or whatever the fuck after the fact. And it's like seeing them basically have their audience on these, you know, marionette strings just seems to sort of like that's exactly what was going on in the first movie. That was the point. So I don't. So it's like it's becoming a victim of what it was essentially trying to like, you know, do a satire of in the first movie. I don't. Once again, I'm sure you can excuse it and say that was their point, but it really doesn't feel like that. It feels like just the movie being lazy and knowing that, just getting by, knowing that, you know, some people will just take to anything, even no matter how low the effort they put into it is. So that, just that whole song. Maybe I'm like overdoing it, and maybe I'm like really taking that song in a much more negative direction than I need to. But that's just the way. I just didn't like anything that song represented one way or another. So, and then of course we had Batman in the first Lego movie, then we had the Lego Batman movie, then we had all the jokes in Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and we've got the Deadpool movies. Any meta jokes you can make about superhero franchises and the different properties and how they work and which ones are liked and which ones are not, all of the jokes have been made. Like, every single one of them surely has been made at this point. But of course, because Batman is still in this movie too, and, you know, Superman and Green Lantern and all those others keep coming in, Wonder Woman, they're gonna keep trying to milk that shit. There was a certain charm to it in Lego Batman, because Lego Batman's the reason all the jokes are gone, because it covered all of them. So now, like, this well is so incredibly dry, and it's to the point where, like, it's frustrating how clever it seems to think that it is, or how sly it seems to think it is. Like, when they're talking about all the different, you know, Batman variations, and then, like, they name drop Adam West, and it's like, you can just tell by the way they deliver that joke. It's like the whole Adam West reference is supposed to seem like some deep cut or something, like oh, I can't believe they made that reference, but it's like, they showed footage, like real footage, of the Batman TV show in the Lego Batman movie. That's about as meta of a joke about the Adam West era as you can make. Just name-dropping Adam West is not a fucking joke anymore. It's just there. And I don't know. So, so there's that also. And then it's... Yeah, I think there was another one like that. There was, another thing where it's just referencing stuff. Once again, going back to Teen Titans Go to the Movies, what the hell is it with these movies and the Back to the Future jokes now? And not just that, but the really, really blatantly obvious Back to the Future jokes now. Because then this one has the whole thing where it references Back to the Future and Bill and Ted and all that. And then Hot Tub Time Machine, and once again, it just seems so... You can just see how calculated the joke is, where it's like, oh yeah, you know, Bill and Ted makes sense. Oh yeah, Back to the Future makes sense. And then Hot Tub Time Machine, and it's like, what? You've referenced a raunchy R-rated movie in the Lego movie? Whoa. Despite the fact that there's a blatant Die Hard joke, too, which is, to their credit, one of the rare reference jokes they make in this movie that actually is as funny as it could have been. So, I mean, but for the most part, it just feels like constant, you know, we're reverting back to that really bad era we went through a long time, where, like, comedy really just turned into making references, if you remember that period of time. It's still kind of lingering, but it's sort of, the dark age of it has kind of feels like it's come and gone, but I mean, it's, and yet, for you know, this property of movies that really started off so, like, clever in how they made those references, it's, like, the fact that I now feel like I need to compare them to when that dark era where comedy seemed to just be referencing other shit with no particular jokes of their own. It was supposed to elicit a laugh because you are familiar with something. And it kind of even does that to itself, like with the Charlie Day character. I forgot his name now, the space guy, but where you've got him back in it. Obviously we're going to talk about Liam Neeson a little later. It's like, one of the characters you kind of do want to see come back, because it seems like they can still do more with him and make him funny, is good cop, bad cop is clearly missing here. I think we see him go by a couple of times, but Liam Neeson is not actually in the movie itself. So we're stuck with like the likes of the Charlie Day character, where it's like, what can you really do with this? Because that character had like the ultimate payoff to his character already in the first movie when he finally got to build his spaceship and he just like flew through all the different realms and shit. And it's like, that's it. That character was spent as soon as that scene happened, because the whole thing, him doing his, spaceship thing, was building up to that. So now that he's had that moment, what do you do with him now? You just bring Charlie Day back to keep doing the whole space is his crack joke. And you can't really lead to something because you already did that. So now you're just kind of left with the remains of what that joke left, which is just him talking about space some more. Hilarious, I guess. So, yeah. And then obviously this one's going to be... Once again, maybe there's a defense here, because one of the things that comes to mind is it feels like this movie is significantly more childish than the other ones have been. Now, of course, the argument can be it's because we now know for a fact that the world we're looking at is the kid from the first movie, but also a much younger child playing with him. So, like, that potentially, could be an argument, but it still feels like really, like, because we talk about the energy in the other movies and how they felt pretty much like non-stop and how they were constantly going. But while it felt more like a testament to its energy in those other movies, in this one it just feels like a short attention span, where it has to just constantly be jumping around or doing something, flashy or whatever. And I think that's another reason there's more songs in it too. So that's kind of unfortunate. And like I said, just the whole thing is just really dragged down by the fact that we know we're in a world within a world now, so it's like, what even... So there's really not going to be much of a payoff either, because that was the thing, was the first one, because it was kind of so unexpected in how it did everything, you don't go into the first Lego movie thinking there's going to be like a twist to it, or like a reveal when we see the live action. So it's like, what can this one lead to in that sense? And we really kind of talked about it when I was talking about the references they make, and it's like, alright, that's a bit underwhelming considering everything that we've seen before, but... so, yeah. And it's also the fact that I think that's also that it's exclusive to these movies. Like, I think another reason the Lego Batman movie works so well, that's something I never really thought about till after I saw this film, was the fact that it doesn't... Number one, it doesn't seem to set itself in the same world. Like, the Lego movie and the Lego Batman movie seem to be in different worlds, despite the fact that Will Arnett is still playing him and he still acts the same as he did in that movie. But the Lego Batman movie, as far as I remember, I haven't seen it since it first came out, but if I remember correctly, it never referenced being inside another world. It just stayed in its own world. But like had those live action references, like showing the Batman TV series footage or the scene where he's watching Jerry Maguire. So it was able to do that and sort of make its own thing. It felt like, well, in the same thing, and I think that even made it better for it that it embraced its own thing so much, while being able to make all those different references. Sometimes they felt forced, but for the most time they felt fresh and nice. And like I said, to the point that they pretty much completely, dried this well up that these movies are still trying to dig water out of, and it's not there anymore. It really isn't. So that's pretty much what this is. It just sort of kind of tries to do the same thing, but doesn't really do much to build on it. But obviously that tends to be what happens in a lot of sequels, but the problem is the fact that they don't seem to be even trying. That's where the real problem is. So there's not really much you can take away from it if they're not even going to try that much. So, but, I can still see people really taking to it, because this whole Lego franchise kind of just has this inherent, backing to it. But I can really feel that this could be underwhelming to a lot of people. So even if people are like really, really into it, but I'm sure it'll still have its fans anyway also, so good for them, I guess. So let's go on to, despite the Liam Neeson connection, an entirely different movie, Cold Pursuit. One thing I kind of wish I had seen was this movie is actually a remake of a Norwegian movie starring Stellan Skarsgård called In Order of Disappearance, which is a really good title. And that was in like 2014, I think, and I missed that one. I still haven't seen that movie, but this is like a remake of it. And after watching this, I'm very interested to seek that out. But in the meantime, I have to just go on this as its own thing, not really knowing how much it compares to the original or how similar they are or whatever. So, obviously, it was built up to be this another Liam Neeson revenge movie. But the thing was I actually saw the poster for this movie before I knew what it was. And I figure it looked like a comedy. It's the poster of the car that's impaled. And it just looked like this over-the-top comedy. It almost looked like, a poster for one of those 80s comedies that's kind of off the radar. But then when I learned it was a Liam Neeson revenge movie, my mind just immediately went to stuff like, A Walk Among the Tombstones and all the obvious ones like Taken and Unknown and whatever the hell else there are, The Commuter. There's so many now, I can't even keep track of all of them. But, and then my mind just kind of got married to that idea, and then the reviews started to come. Like, I wasn't even gonna seek this out. It was like, that seems like a I'll wait for DVD thing. But the reviews started coming in, and not only were they really positive, they were talking about this whole black comedy angle, and it was getting like Coen Brothers comparisons. And it was like, I should probably see this fucking thing. So, yeah, and the thing about this is that, not just Coen Brothers comparisons in regards to the comedy, but every now and then it might get specifically Fargo comparisons, mainly with the setting and also the characters played by Emmy Rossum and John Doman, who was Rawls on The Wire. Kind of have when we first see them, we kind of immediately get this vibe of Margie and Lou. And they're kind of surprisingly insignificant for most of the movie. They are here. But a few characters kind of get that treatment. But apart from the fact that it kind of has, that going on, it is also interesting that it seems to sort of be subverting the expectations a bit when you go into a Liam Neeson revenge movie specifically. Sort of like how a lot of people thought The Grey was going to be him beating the shit out of wolves, and it was more like this whole existential thing. And he doesn't even really fight the wolves on screen. And it's like, there's something about Liam Neeson being surrounded by snow that makes him want to say, you know what, I'm just going to do the total opposite of what people think I'm going to do. which is nice and refreshing. So, as you can probably guess, it's one of those cases where he's built up to be this sort of, I wouldn't say normal dude, but he's a dude that apparently goes above and beyond, because at first sight he's just a regular snowplow driver, but then at the same time at the beginning of the movie he's getting a Citizen of the Year award. So of course everything's going to be going just perfectly fine until his son is murdered with these drug dealers that he works with. Made to look like a heroin overdose, but it's definitely murder. And he very quickly gets wind of this. It's like, as soon as that happens, it's kind of amazing how fast this movie gets going. Like, there is hardly any build-up to Liam Neeson going around killing people. Graphically, violently, bloodily, all that stuff. All the stuff that you're here for. And when you hear about this, it's like, I wonder where the comedy comes in. But I mean, obviously, if you are aware of enough black comedies, you can get, even if a movie seems really serious, with this kind of setup, you can kind of imagine where it might go. Like, it'll be how they do the deaths, or how he disposes of the bodies, or all that. But it's got a number of forms of humor. It's also kind of got that sort of Elmer Leonard thing, where it's like, even though it's this movie that seems like the story's right out of a crime novel, for the sake of humor, they'll throw in those random things that feel like real life kicking in, where something that, like, a movie typically or a novel would gloss over, and they just sort of make that happen to kind of bring that into it and bring this sort of real life humor into it, even if it's the darkest of situations. But then every now and then also, like, sometimes it doesn't, like, at first I wasn't sure about it, because I wasn't quite sure how exactly the humor matched, because there's no real, I mean, I would say there's no real warning when the humor's coming, which in many cases is the best kind of humor, which makes it even funnier when it's unexpected. But I don't know, for a while it just felt like such a bizarre combination between the style of humor that it was and what it was we were looking at in the very dire setting of the movie. But as the movie goes on, and the more you kind of get, it kind of becomes part of the world. The weird sense of humor about it. Every now and then there's something a bit more, in your face comedy, like when he's in the car with this hitman and they're driving down the road and they're changing the radio around and the Barbie song comes on. It's got stuff like that. But for the most part, it comes from like just in general like a dark sense of humor. There's this really great running thing that goes on, and the great thing about this is they find a way to use this as both like something serious and dark, and in other scenarios something funny. Where every time, no matter how big or small, every time a character dies in this movie, they get like a little in memoriam like text on the screen where like it fades to black and like their name comes up with like a cross or something. And that happens for every time a character dies after it happens. And it's like sometimes, like his son gets one at the beginning, but then later on, it's almost like it becomes like a punchline to some scenes where we think one guy's gonna be like fine, and we don't even see their death. It just cuts to his death card. So stuff like that really does work a lot. And like I said, that's pretty skillful. They can make that work as both a serious thing in one context and a funny thing in another, without feeling like it's sort of losing its tone a little bit. And like I said, I was having trouble kind of getting into it at first, because even knowing that it was kind of a dark comedy going into it, it still took some getting used to. And it also doesn't help. I was talking about like the Emmy Rossum character and them get like, it seems like they're supposed to be more important than they actually are. Then there's Laura Dern playing Neeson's wife, who seems like she could have really done something with this. Like we saw, what she did with her 5 minutes in Wild. But it's just another sort of thankless wife role, and eventually she just disappears. She just decides to leave, and we never see her again. So that's unfortunate, but we do also have another thing that's kind of holding me back at first. I do like this movie a lot, but at first I was struggling there, especially with the villain. A villain named Viking, played by Tom Bateman, I think his name is. And I started to notice as I was looking at Viking, I mean, this is something that's occurred to me before, but it kind of really occurred to me when I was looking at Viking, and that is, if there's one problem with these Liam Neeson movies, I think, all of them, Nonstop, you can probably throw in there too, is another one I forgot about. These movies tend to have, like, not, like, the whole idea is that Liam Neeson is the star. So, and typically in, movies like this where it's, hero versus villains, you usually have, like, a really cool or interesting villain to go, against that hero. But it seems like they really want to make Neeson the star enough to the point that I feel like every one of these, nothing comes to me to contradict this. All of these Liam Neeson action movies have weak-ass villains. There's like none that feel like they match him. They're all just these dudes that we're just waiting to see killed by him unceremoniously. And a lot of the time it is unceremoniously. This one not excluded. But they still find a way to make that work. But the thing here is, because a lot of it is him dealing with a custody battle with his son, the villain. And a lot of these scenes are like him, he's trying to get the kid on this diet to the point that he throws a bag of cookies out of a moving car. And he's dealing with, like, he's basically trying to raise his kid with these henchmen around him. One of which is Hurt from The Wire. We brought two people from The Wire in. And his character kind of has, like, a character quirk that randomly shows up for one scene that takes him in an interesting direction, but it doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's not plot related at all. But the thing about the villain and his son here thing is, obviously you can see the parallel of he killed Liam Neeson's son and all that, so you know that there's going to be some sort of, like, tie into this, but it's how they sort of get to that tie-in. And so they start introducing other plot points that start making their way into this, and this is the point where the movie probably could have gotten really overly complicated, where they introduce this Native American gang that also kind of has beef with Viking to begin with, and then we introduce Neeson's brother, who is William Forsythe, who, conveniently enough, used to be in the crime world and has, ties to these people. So it's all sort of connecting in, like, this admittedly probably convoluted way, but the way the movie executes it, though, and the way they sort of slowly work the other characters into it, it does sort of feel like just when it's starting to get a bit too packed, it evens out and the plot does start to make sense and starts to go in directions that are inevitable but also logical. So, inevitable in this sense of being like, we're afraid it's going to be too predictable, but they managed to throw in some curves here and there, and for the most part, it does. Once you see what the full layout is, you kind of know all the directions it's going to go. But even then, it's still nicely executed, and a lot of the characters are a lot more interesting than they probably would be in another movie. I mean, I still don't know how I feel about Viking as a villain though, where he's really just like a whiny dude in a suit and all that, but. And once again, maybe that's, another one of those subversion things where you expect the big bad guy to be, somebody that's almost Liam Neeson's equal. Like I said, it's almost par for the course now that the villains in these Liam Neeson movies just don't stand a chance. Yeah, and then, like I said, you do get some of these moments where they play with, like, the violence a little bit. Like, there's a point in time where he's beating a dude and trying to get information out of him. And the reason this beating stops is because he just gets tired of beating him. And it's so it has moments like that. And then the direction that scene goes also kind of fits in with the dark humor really nicely. And like I said, like the more brutal it gets, the more the dark comedy is played up. But it never gets like really over the top brutal, like you may expect when you hear about a movie this violent being a black comedy. The violence is never really like overblown, which I thought was nice, to where they kind of reined it in a little bit, but were able to still keep that humor in there also. And then sometimes every now and then there's just these little details that you just kind of appreciate. Like, I think I was talking about the subversion of how you expect the villains to be on their off time, where they're not just kind of being villains constantly. So you've got one of these guys that's one of the henchmen that killed his son, and when he tracks that guy down, you kind of expect, he's going to be doing some, drug dealer henchman shit in a warehouse or something. It's like, this dude runs, like, a tuxedo wedding dress store where you go in and spend, like, thousands and thousands to, like, rent tuxedos and shit. And that's where he finds him working. And it's like, just stuff like that is really appreciated, and things you don't kind of expect when you see the characters laid out with their, just their outlines. So... yeah, I do appreciate stuff like that. But like I said, every now and then there is something that feels like it doesn't really have much of a place. They introduce a hitman named the Eskimo, and they build him up for a little bit, and like he's going to be this big bad dude. When they started to introduce him, I kind of was thinking like, sort of like Clive Owen in The Bourne Identity, getting a character like that, which would have been really cool in a movie like this, to introduce like a new character towards the end that's sort of comes and goes and has this presence throughout once they're introduced. I kind of think of Jude Law in Road to Perdition too, but this character goes nowhere like this. I mean, he's like, he works as more of like I can't say he goes nowhere, because he's like a dot that connects to another dot and gets us somewhere, but still, it's like, you could have made this any other character, but to build him up like he was gonna be something, and then something really cool that that would have worked really well in this movie, and then it's just not, and it's just that simple. It can be underwhelming, but I mean, for the most part, the movie does work quite a bit. It's something that I'm excited to see again, probably when it comes out on the whenever it's, Blu-ray or DVD or whatever releases. I really would like to check it out again, and I do think, like, it's going to grow better in my mind. I can already feel that. So I'm really curious how seeing it again will feel, especially since I had a hard time getting into it at first. Like, the humor felt out of place and all that, and it felt like there were an awful lot of characters, but like I said, once it smoothed itself all out and we got a grasp of like the full world between all of its characters, how they connected, and the dark humor that's lurking under all this. it did ultimately make a pretty satisfying movie. So once again, I just gravitate towards dark comedy in general. So yeah. So yeah, that's gonna be this. We're not done with dark comedy, obviously, because the Happy Death Day sequel is. I'll actually be seeing it in like 2 days, and not a fan of the first one, so we'll see how this goes. And also Alita. And just for shits and giggles, I might see Miss Ball on its way out just to see what that is. For some reason, I've somehow gotten a bit more curious about it over the past week or two. So, yeah. And then we'll go from there. I think after that's How to Train Your Dragon, and then that might be about the end of February. So, and then I've got a whole bunch of verses I'm late on. I'm doing all this catch up stuff all at the same time. So, probably be doing that as soon as I turn the camera off. So, until all that stuff,